Hello everyone. I've had several questions on my channel recently about what I think about growing in New Zealand sphagnum moss and the Better Grow orchid grade premium moss. I love growing in orchid grade moss. Sphagnum moss is just a wonderful media for me in my environment. I live in Tennessee. I have it all around my area. I live in a woodland forest, and I'm going to kind of take you and show you some of the native moss in my yard and around my house. But I just wanted to share with you some information about growing in moss. The first thing to keep in mind when you're growing in moss is balance. The moss doesn't like to be too wet, and it doesn't like to get too dry either. So you have to check your moss orchids pretty regularly just to make sure that they're not getting too dry. You can tell if they're too wet if they start developing mold on top of the moss. Air circulation around your moss orchids is really beneficial, and it will keep that mold from developing. So I highly recommend either using a ceiling fan or a small space fan around your orchids that are growing in moss. It's going to save you a lot of time and trouble. And I grow more than half of my orchid collection in New Zealand sphagnum moss. I enjoy growing in it that much. It just really, really works for me. All of my miniatures are in New Zealand sphagnum moss. They absolutely love it. One thing to keep in mind when you're growing in moss is it dries from the bottom to the top, not like with bark where it dries out from the top to the bottom. So that is one thing that you need to keep in mind. If it's feeling just barely damp on the top, then you know that the bottom portion of that container is dry, and that's one way you know that it needs to be watered. Also, the good thing about growing in New Zealand sphagnum moss is it's very heavy when it's wet. I just watered this little miniature and it is heavy. When it starts getting light in weight, you can tell the difference, and then you know that it's time for that plant to be watered. And another really wonderful thing about New Zealand sphagnum moss is that it lasts a long time. And also it holds moisture really well and nutrients really well. On the left, you see my little miniature. This was my little espresso orchid that I did a video on back in May. When I bought this miniature, it was purple. It was so magnesium deficient. And so I placed it in some New Zealand sphagnum moss. It grew so quickly. The roots just grew so quickly that I had to actually put it in more moss. It actually started out in a container about this size. So all I didn't have to disturb the roots because I had used premium New Zealand sphagnum moss. It's just so much different than regular brown basket moss. So make sure you get the right one. But what I did was I just took it from a container this size. I added some more New Zealand sphagnum moss to this container, and I was good to go. And the roots have already filled in to the bottom of this container. So as you see, if you have an orchid that is deficient in any way, the moss will really keep those nutrients around the roots. That is a really big plus for growing in New Zealand sphagnum moss. And I've had several of you ask me how my Dendrobium Phalaenopsis are doing in moss. Half of my Dendrobiums are in moss, and they are doing so very well. Half of those that I have in New Zealand sphagnum moss are in bloom, and the other half are in spike. So that is a really good bloom ratio. 100% are either in bloom or in spike. So this cute little April's Hope, she has been in bloom now for quite a while. And the blooms are still going strong on this beautiful plum den. I absolutely love this one. So they're all doing just very well in the New Zealand sphagnum moss. And also my beautiful miniature Cattleya. I have been growing this plant for 16 years in New Zealand sphagnum moss. It has always been in moss. And whenever I have to repot this, all I do is I get new New Zealand sphagnum moss and I add to the existing moss because this moss stays beautiful. It is a very long lasting medium. So let me show you what the beautiful moss here looks like. It's just absolutely beautiful and green. And this Cattleya just loves this moss. And several of you have asked me how I know so much about moss. Well, this is native Tennessee moss that grows in my yard. It grows up the trees. It grows in the cracks and crevices of cracked pavement. It grows everywhere here. I walk on moss every single day. So it's around me all the time, and I absolutely love moss. You can see it growing up this tree with the lichen. It's on all the trees in my yard. And here it is growing up through the cracked pavement in front of my house. So as you see, moss is everywhere here. I am pretty sure that if I sat still long enough, that moss would probably grow on me. And here's a quick shot of my male woodpecker. He knows that the snow is coming tomorrow, so all of the birds have been out at my feeders today. It's just such a treat when he comes. He's a beautiful, beautiful bird. And here's my beautiful red Christmas cactus. I do believe that I'm going to try to root some cuttings into some New Zealand sphagnum moss and see what happens. I believe that they would grow really well in New Zealand sphagnum moss, so I'm going to give it a try. And thank you all so much for going on my moss information and tour today. And you all just be highly favored, deeply loved, and greatly blessed. And we'll talk to you all next time.